So, some people in life are just naturally interested in things. And this is a cool thing. I mean, on one hand, your brain is whirring away forever, and that can be stressful. But on the other hand, being curious means that you have a really creative life filled with discovery and self development and just trying things out. And sometimes it is hard just to switch off that curiosity and just blob and relax. And I know this type of person really well because I'm married to one. Hi, my name is Gatling, and welcome to Creativity Uncovered. This is a podcast where I'm on a journey to uncover how everyday people find inspiration, get inventive, and open their imagination. Basically, I want to know how people find creative solutions and then how they use them at home, at work, at play, and everything in between. And my goal for the podcast is that by the end of it, you'll be armed with a whole suite of tried and tested ways to summon creativity next time that you need it. So today, I'm speaking with my lovely husband, Michael Back, who is just an all-round good guy, and he really shares a love of curiosity with me. And we are always just having chats about things, every random thing that just piques our interest, and lots of chats about creativity since I launched this podcast. And last time we did, I just said, stop, we need to stop this and we need to save it for the podcast. And so here we are. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. I'm honored to have got a call up. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. So it's lovely to be in the guest seat and be on the receiving end of your beautiful podcast hosting.
Oh, shucks. No, we are not in the same. We're not in the same room at the moment. Michael's in his office and I'm in my home studio. So we're trying to make it a bit more formal. And it probably does sound formal that I keep calling him Michael Back, but for some reason I call him by his full name. What do you think about that? I've started it. Now lots of other people do it. What do you think about that?
I kind of like it because it reminds me of you, but it is something since like the day we met, you just called me Michael Back. And, you know, we now have 4-year-old nieces and nephews calling me Michael Back. So I think it's really caught on. And yeah, I think I even heard my dad call me Michael Back the other day, which was very odd, but there's something very catchy about it. So yeah, I really like it.
It just rolls off the tongue. And I think that's what I like about you is that you're like, this is cool and quirky. Let's just go with it.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's some people who are just naturally suited to first name, last name, and some people are just naturally suited to first name. So don't know what it means, but I'll take it. It's fine.
Yeah. And our hairy son, Monty von Backling, the sausage dog, he goes by all three names.
But very much just Monty, I reckon. Yeah. Or the million other nicknames we've come up with. But he seems very single word rather than, you know, the full name. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Unless he's in trouble.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. He gets all of it.
Yeah. Now Monty is also in the room. He's having a little sleep under my chair. So you may or may not hear him chime in later with a little bit of a bark, but that's just add to the joy of the episode. So yeah, I mentioned before, Michael, that, you know, we are always talking about creativity and just interesting things and things that make us laugh. And I wanted to bring you on to talk to you on the podcast because I just think you have a really interesting view on life. But for background, for people who don't know the legendary Michael Back, basically a born and bred businessman. You started at University of Business and then you trained as a financial planner. But then you have had this like radical change to marketing, business coaching. You're now a radio DJ. That seems like such a random journey. Obviously, I know parts of it, but tell me, you were on this straightforward and kind of analytical path, it seems, and now you're playing in such a creative space. How did that happen? Like, what prompted that change?
I mean, the blunt answer to that is just discontent, unhappiness. I remember being on that path, and I cannot, there's a lot of hindsight with it. Like, I look back on that time and I can analyze how I got to the point where I was unsatisfied. But at the time, I was just like following the bouncing ball. Like, I finished uni and I was like, oh, well, there's these career fairs. I should just go to a career fair. And then you walk around the career fair and you go, oh, okay, there's all these banks who are asking us to apply. Yeah, that's what I should be doing after a business degree. So I'll apply to work at a bank. And then, you get shortlisted and you get a job at a bank. You're like, cool. All right, I'm working at a bank now. And one thing leads to another. And then all of a sudden you're a trained financial advisor and on the path to being a financial planner. And, there's obviously conversations and decisions and thinking along the way. But I think there wasn't ever a moment where I was, towards the end of uni, I'm like, this is my vision. I think I was just kind of living in the moment and just following one step after the other. But it was when I got to a point where I was in a business with people I loved, doing a job that I kind of liked but didn't love. But then that voice of discontent and dissatisfaction just started getting louder and louder. And it was only then that I really started to zoom in on it and to maybe look backwards and start to question, well, hold on, is this what I want? And how did I get here? And, did I choose this path or did this path choose me, which was probably the latter. But yeah, I think it was just from that nagging voice in my head saying this isn't quite right that it forced me to do something about it.
That's such a common thing that so many people have said, that I think like you go down this journey of your career where it's sort of the chosen path for you, or kind of the next natural thing. Maybe all your friends are doing it, or your schoolmates are doing it or whatever. So you just sort of blindly follow. But then there's something inside you that's going, yeah, actually, this might not be the right thing for me. So you sort of sought out creativity. You moved from purely financial advice stuff into marketing financial advice. Tell me, like, there was obviously something missing in your career, that being creativity. Did you have creativity previously and you sort of squashed it, or was that a brand new thing completely for you?
It's a good question. I think.
Thank you.
You're very good at questions. I think that if I look back now, I was a really creative kid. I think a lot of that was out of necessity. And this is not a rag on my parents, but I just think when you're an only child, you're kind of bored a lot of the time. And you don't stay bored for very long. It forces you to be creative and to invent games on your own. And I remember distinctly spending, like, we're talking like 7 to 8 hours a day on a weekend with all my action figurines all over the house, creating these elaborate stories and moving them room to room. And like, honestly, I was writing like scripts in my head about how the entire story played out. And yeah, it was like probably like a 3-part movie if you add it all up. But, I think that constraint of not having other kids around to choose the game meant that I always had to create things on the fly to keep me entertained. I hit a point in my teenage years where someone said to me, oh, I'm really bored. And I actually thought to myself, I don't actually know what that feeling is. I can honestly say I can never remember a time in my life of ever feeling bored, which is a really nice thing in a lot of ways. But I think it means that I've always entertained myself. And I think there's creativity wrapped up in that, right? So, if I look back on my childhood years, I think I was super creative, but I wasn't necessarily recognized as, oh, you're a really creative kid. Wasn't that good at music. I wasn't into drama. I actually had a lot of interest in drama, but it was kind of squashed by the people around me a little bit, just like, oh, you can't make money out of that. So I don't know, if I was to kind of bring it all together, I think I had very natural, innate leanings towards very creative things. If I think of the happiest times in my teenage years or childhood or even early 20s, it was always like, so as an example, some of the happiest memories of my 20s were on road trips. Why I love that is you're creating the adventure as you go along. And even in the car with a group of people, you're creating a conversation that wasn't there before. So they are kind of creative moments. I think where I got stuck was that work needed to be serious and kind of like, that was like, that's the time to switch off that creative brain and just do a job. And then I was finding other times in my life to be creative, but I hadn't reconciled the two. So my career had gone down one path, but it wasn't necessarily a reflection of my true self, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's such a shame. I think, I mean, as you would know from listening to this podcast, that I have a very broad view of what creativity is, but so many people think that it is being artistic is creativity. So, as you said before,
Yes.
music and painting and whatever. But actually, everything you just said was like this intense use of your imagination,
Mm.
and that is the ultimate creative act because you're fabricating these things that weren't there. You're telling these stories, you're developing characters. How is that not creative?
Definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, yeah, like at its purest form, I think creativity is just bringing something into being that wasn't there before. And that can be music, it can be a theatrical performance, it can be a poem, but it can also be a laugh, it can be a pun, it can be um, all this complex stuff that's disconnected and bringing it together and simplifying it. Like there's so many forms that can take, but yeah, the way that imagination can translate to play, that's yeah, I think play is an outcome of creativity. I also think it's a way to get into creativity as well. So yeah, I think it's all the same thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, play is just mucking around. And you never go, I'm going to go play now. And my objective is blah, 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 blah. Like,
Mm,
you
mm.
don't give yourselves goals, objectives, KPIs when you're playing. You're literally just being in the moment and just mucking around and seeing what
Yeah,
happens. I love that.
that's right. And actually, that is how my path out of this career that felt like I was ticking all the boxes of society of, you're on the path and you're on the grad program and you're doing all the training and you're up, 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 that kind of treadmill we all get caught on. I knew I needed to break the cycle, but I had absolutely no idea where to start. And it turns out that I found this book that literally, without any exaggeration, changed my life. And the book was called Screw Work, Let's Play. And that is the whole premise of the book is that when we're adults, we become really serious and we only do something when there's an end game. And that kind of is the antithesis of what play is, which is there is no objective other than self-expressing and sharing something in a moment. And so that was my path out of it. It was like not to overthink what the future looks like, but actually just to tap into more of that energy of like, what do I love doing at my core? And then just finding a way to do more of that, which, paradoxically then ended up becoming a career and there was an outcome, but I never did it with that outcome in mind. And if I had have had too much of an outcome in mind, I think it would have defeated the purpose. So yeah, that was like literally how I unstuck myself in that moment.
That's the businessman in you is that you can't help but make it back into like a career choice again.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, it's so true.
But I like just to go back a little bit, talking about those epic stories you were making and moving around the house and all that sort of stuff. When you came back to it, uh, were you extending the story each time or were you reimagining the story? Or was it a brand new story each time?
Don't remember that much. Um, I think I was probably starting afresh each time. Although I do remember as a kid, I would have dreams that continued. So it would stop at a point, and then the next night, the dream would pick up where it had ended the night before, which was kind of cool. And it hasn't happened to me since. But yeah, I think in terms of play, I think I like the novelty of a new adventure every time. So yeah, it wasn't like this big kind of multi-week or multi-month saga necessarily.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, for context for people listening, if you don't know, my background is that I'm from a massive family. I have five brothers, two sisters. Michael's an only child. But so it says, I'm very curious about his upbringing. I'm sure he's the same with mine. But we used to do
Mm.
the same thing. We used to call it Animal Kingdom, and three of my brothers and I used to play that. And it was a different story each time, but the characters were very well established. So you kind of knew what was going to happen there was a hierarchy in the animal kingdom, and I mean it's pretty much the same storyline. All my animals got eaten by all their animals. That's the general crux of the story. But it was, yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
like you kind of had this mutual understanding of where we're starting and where it ended up. It didn't really matter.
Yeah. No, I definitely, when you say it like that, I would have rewritten the rules every single time. I did have a dragon toy, and as you know, I love the NRL team, the Dragons. So I probably featured the dragon toy in every one of those stories. It was kind of creepy. It was like an action figure with a dragon's head. It was very you would have hated it. But but yeah, that would have been in every story. But yeah, something else you would know about me is that my favorite meal is the one I've never tried. So I think if I think of that in a play context, I would have always looked to do something completely different than the last time, rather than had any consistency or continuation of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's always an exploration and trying something new, and I like that. And I mean, that makes sense that that's not a new thing for you. It probably was your entire life.
I was also very lucky though that I think my mum in particular is a very playful person. Like I think she and it's probably out of necessity too when you have an only child. You can't have this hierarchy where it's like I'm the parent and you're the kid. That there is a bit more of a sense of like we're all kind of equal. We're like a unit of three. But yeah, mum was like, I remember mum reading books to me, and she wouldn't just read the book, she put on funny voices and it would become like a stand-up comedy routine. So I think I had a really good mentor with my mum in particular in play. And also, my dad has a really great silly side. My grandfather, who was like dad's dad, was, mad as a cut snake. So yeah, I had some good allies in play and being silly. And I mean, you've met my uncles. They're, absolute lunatics. And yeah, that energy hasn't changed. We are still playing and being stupid, and 90% of our conversations are nonsensical. So yeah, it's been there since the start for sure.
There's definitely a strong flavor of fun, well, funniness, I suppose, in I think in your creativity and all those people you just mentioned, cracking a joke, long running internal jokes. Do you think you can be creative without having that sense of humor, or do you think that's one and the same for you?
I'd say it's like absolute core to, I think humor is like, it would be one of my core values. Like, I just think the ability to see the funny side of everything and to lighten a mood through laughter is just, I think it's such a gift that we can give to each other. If I'm choosing something to watch, like 99% of the time, it's going to be comedy. But I would say as I've got older, I have probably appreciated different versions of creativity. And yeah, when I talked before, like, I mean, again, it's all come back to business, right? When I talked before about, like having to not just have this career that had no creativity or little creativity, and then this life where my inner being was crying out for it. I suppose the reconciliation of that is finding versions of creativity, say at work, which aren't necessarily funny. Like sometimes I do try and be funny at work if I'm doing like LinkedIn posts or email marketing or stuff like that. But I do find that there are types of creativity I've tapped into in my later years that aren't as funny, but they are still really fulfilling and they feel like a bit of an adventure because it is a bit off the beaten track. So I don't know, this is like a long stretch, but it would be the equivalent of a film director who has written heaps of comedy, like Adam Sandler. He did like heaps of comedy movies. Then he did that movie Punch Drunk Love, where it was like serious, almost like a dramatic indie film, and it was like a real departure for him. And I imagine that he was scratching some sort of itch. I started at funny stuff, and I think I'll always come back to funny stuff, but I've definitely scratched other itches along the way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, that's the part of like being in tune with your curiosity, is that you can seek out these new opportunities, and they will give you fulfillment in different ways. So sometimes it's great to do a bit of variety of stuff. So tell me, like, what are the things you're doing now in terms of what's piquing your interest in terms of your creativity, and what itches are you scratching?
I think that's been, probably hit a point, as you would know very well, last year where I felt a little bit like I was in a bit of a rut. And I think that's probably because I had let work be the extent of my creativity. And, perhaps had just found a career that brought out my creative side to a point where it's dominated my creative side and I've got very few outlets on the other side. So I'm still a work in progress there. Like I think I'm still kind of emerging out of that and working out, okay, well, what do I want this multifaceted life to look like, which will have creativity in different formats? The radio show is the big one for me. Like I think that you were there when I got asked if I wanted to be on the radio. And there was something about it which logically just seemed crazy, but then emotionally it just seemed like the exact thing I should do. Because one of those things that I did when I was a kid was create radio shows. Like I used to sit in front of a tape recorder and record radio shows. And like there's been something about being on radio since I've been a kid that I've always wanted to do. And so, launching in a couple of weeks, petrified in one way, but super, super, super excited in another. But I think that's going to be a really interesting experiment for me.
Yes, for radio.
Yeah.
At that party, he was like, "You, Michael Back, have a face for radio. Do you want to be on my brand new station?" No, it didn't happen like that. I think he obviously knew you were interested in that type of thing, but as anyone can probably tell from this episode, you have the gift of the gab, very smooth talking. And I think this is a really cool part of our next chapter, is that I think both of us, because we both run our own businesses, we've really kind of struggled to get that balance right between work and play and fun and life, and it gets skewed very easily. So having more things in here where you're committed to this time slot every single week is kind of forcing you to live that creative life every single week. Whereas like sometimes when it's just like a hobby on the side or it's something for fun, you can easily push it out of the way for something that's more important.
That's right. Yeah. It's so true. Yeah, it's gonna force me to show up every week and do something different.
So what is it about the radio that you think is exciting and like interesting to you?
Yeah, I've never even thought about that because I've always been drawn to it, but I don't know why. I mean, I suppose as I'm obsessed with listening to podcasts and I'm always waiting for every podcast episode I love to drop so I can listen as soon as it does, including Creativity Uncovered. But what I think what I love about the medium, and this definitely wasn't what I was thinking about when I was a kid. I think when I was a kid, it was because I didn't have a camera, right? Like I just had a tape player and it probably just, was easy for me to access. But I think the fact that it can follow you wherever you go, I think is really cool. So it's not something where you need to stop in your tracks as a listener and absorb it, but it can accompany you whatever you're doing, which is why I love music as well, is that, wherever you are, it can be part of your memory. I'm a big fan of Hamish and Andy, and there's certain moments in their history that are like, legendary or, like the highlights reel of the funniest things that have happened. And for some weird reason, I can remember where I was when I heard that. Like, oh yeah, I was walking through the QVB in Sydney when I heard that joke and laughed. So I do think there's this nice way that radio attaches to your memories, in a way where perhaps TV doesn't. But, and I hadn't thought of this until just now, but I suppose too that when you are looking at something in TV or movie, they're kind of telling you what to imagine because it's in front of you. But I love reading and I love radio, and I think a lot of that is because you've got to use your imagination to picture the scene or imagine what people look like, or there's almost a creative element where you're piecing it together in your head.
I agree, because I was just thinking that when you said that, like, what is it about the audio medium and even reading, is that you're sort of forced to use your imagination to connect the dots between the visuals and what it sounds like or what it reads as. And isn't it disappointing, like if you read the book first and then you go and you watch the movie Wow, that is not what I thought that person was gonna.
Yeah. I was talking to your mom about this the other day. Like she was saying about watching Harry Potter. I'm like, I don't want to watch it because I've read the books and I've got my view of what it looks like, and I don't want that to be kind of tainted or compromised by what what the director of the movies wanted it to look like. So yeah, I completely know what you mean.
Yeah, because like I mean the visuals are so powerful that I can't actually remember what the Harry Potter people looked like when I was reading it because
Mm,
the real people on the TV have been superimposed in my imagination, and it's really hard to get away from that.
yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, like I think that's something I find interesting as a listener of radio. Um, I don't know. I just think, yeah, at its core, like one of the things I just love the most is good conversations. I love what we're doing now. I love I love going deep in conversations. Like I don't like those kind of 1 minute awkward chats at the water cooler in the office. But when you get that opportunity to have like a really nice deep one on one, I just find that hugely fulfilling. And I think that's at its core what radio it's a one-way conversation, but there is that intimacy of radio where you feel like you're talking to that person and you kind of feel like you're connecting with someone. And so yeah, I think it's like I've been on the receiving end of that a lot, and like a lot of creative pursuits you can appreciate creativity, but then when you step into the arena and try and create the art, it's probably a lot harder than you expect it's going to be. But that's an exciting challenge for me.
Yes. And I mean, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that they actually said to you on the radio show that you should be trying to imagine talking to a specific person. I
They did
guess
too.
that's probably so it feels more like it could be a two-way conversation, even though it's clearly not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they said like don't think of speaking to 1,000 people, just think of one person in a car. Just imagine you're talking to them. So yeah, I think that's cool advice. How have you found the transition? Because like it feels like you've been doing this forever, but you haven't. There was obviously a point where you had like you're kind of 12 months ahead of me on this, right? That you were listening to heaps of podcasts and decided to launch your own.
Hmm.
What how's that transition been for you? Like has it been surprising? Has it been different than what you expected?
I don't know what I expected. I think when I decided I wanted to do the podcast, it was to legitimize being able to reach out to creative people and literally talk about creativity without sounding like an absolute weirdo, being like,
Mm,
"Hey, I don't know you, but let's talk." It gives me a very legitimate reason to reach out to people. Um, the second reason I suppose I wanted to do it was because it scared the bejeebus out of me. And I just didn't, you know this, Michael Beck, but when something scares me, I just want to do it more because I don't want it to let it beat me, which is disgustingly weird.
it's a beautiful quality.
But but you know, prior to this, I knew I had to be on video for work. I knew that I needed to be more active on social media, and I was like willing myself into it. But the podcast has sort of fast tracked all of that for me because it's this wonderful distraction of going, yes, I'm on camera now. Yes, I'm on the microphone, and I'm having to think about my voice undulations and clarity and background sounds. For example, our neighbor mowing right now. But you're easily distracted by all that because you're having these really cool conversations. And so that's been surprising to me about how comfortable I felt so quickly. I think after my first 5 minutes of
Mm,
my first episode, I actually was like, nah, this is really cool. It doesn't really matter that I'm on
mm,
video right now. It doesn't really matter that I'm sounding squeaky on the microphone because I'm getting so much benefit out of this. And I think that's been really surprising to me.
mm. The thing that I've found interesting with you doing what you're doing, without putting you on the spot and embarrassing you here, is the number one thing. Like, yeah, obviously family and friends of ours are listening to it, and when we see them, they give you feedback, and they all say the same thing, which is, "Gee, you're like so good at this," and "Oh, you just like you're a natural." And I don't think that's them just saying what they think you want to hear. I genuinely agree and believe that there is something about this medium that plays to your strengths. And I've said this to you before that more than most people I've ever met, you are the most incredible listener. and you're not constantly thinking, oh, what am I going to say next, or what's, you know, will they just shut up so I can ask my next question? Like, you're so in the moment, whether we're just like having a beer at the pub or in a podcast episode. And I think that means that you ask great questions and you draw connections. And your guests have all said, or a lot of them have said to you, oh gosh, I've never thought about that before. I've never spoken about that before. And that's a lot of your gift. Now, this isn't an ad for your podcast, but the reason I'm bringing that up is I believe that there's something about I think there's no coincidence here. I think your innate desire to start a podcast was because probably subconsciously you knew that you had these advantages or that it was the right medium for you. And I think the evidence has shown that to be true. And yeah, it's beautiful to see. And I think that, you listen to yourself, even though there wasn't that, I'm doing this for lead generation. Like, there wasn't anything. It was just that little voice inside you told you to do it, and you honored that voice. And I think like the results and the joy that you get out of it has proven that to be like worth listening to. Like, I think there's a real connection between that voice that you listen to and the way that it's all playing out for you.
Thank you, Michael Back. That's very friendly. But yeah, I do think it has been something like I never really wanted to be a podcaster. I wanted to have creative conversations. But I was sort of reflecting on this a couple of weeks ago, actually, a couple of months ago. Time, what is time? Time is passing so quickly. A couple of months ago, I was thinking about the podcast and why am I actually enjoying it so much? And then I realized I really love people's stories and I really love to understand things. And it's basically my opportunity to get to ask those questions and to kind of piece the puzzle together and like make those connections. I think that's really interesting to me because, you know this, I almost exclusively read biographies and autobiographies. And that's because I'm so interested in people's stories and their backgrounds and why they did what they did and, what has influenced them to take this path. This is basically that, but I get to ask the questions that are all floating in my head when I'm reading a book. I can actually get to ask them in the podcast.
It's so cool when you have that hindsight to be able to join those dots and go, there's you're kind of piecing together your own story by identifying things like that. It's pretty incredible.
But I think like your other point there about, like I wanted to do it and I just did it. And now I've found this like extra bit of fun in my life. It is really important for people to sort of open their mind to these creative ideas. And if you have this inkling to try something out, just do it. You don't have to necessarily think, oh, well, I'm going to be a famous painter, so I'm going to start this painting, or I want to be in a band, so I'm going to take singing lessons. It's kind of like, I had this little feeling that I just want to sing. I'm just going to sing and to see what happens, I think that's so important to be able to give yourself permission just to try these things out if the curiosity is there.
Yeah. It's really funny you said permission because that word was in my head just as you were about to say it, is that I think that it kind of comes back to that Screwwork Let's Play thing that I read, is that we as kids don't need permission to play. It's what's expected. But then when life gets serious, too many of us just silence that play element. And that's the journey I'm on, is like when I was writing financial plans for a living and, hating work every day, I hadn't given myself permission to find a career that brought out my best skills or creative pursuits. And even with things like the radio show, like it's been on my mind for almost 40 years, but it's only now I'm giving myself permission to do it, right? And I think permission is it's an interesting idea, but no one can give you that permission. Like, you got to give it to yourself. But then there's another side to it, which is, and this is where I think creativity gets a bit woo-woo, but you asked me before about how am I looking to express creativity. I think the whole spiritual side of creativity has been really interesting to me lately. And I don't know if any of your listeners would have read The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, but I couldn't recommend that book highly enough. But he's this epic music producer. He produced some of the most incredible albums of the modern era. But he's written this book, which almost reads like in a biblical way, where he's like sharing these like spiritual learnings around creativity. And he's just opened up this portal about what creativity is that firstly is fascinating to me because it's so different than what I've heard before. But there's a lot of it I can identify where I go, oh yeah, that's happened to me and I've seen that happen. And I think there's this, it's almost that when you listen to that voice like you did and honor it, the universe rewards you in some way. Now, it's not always the way you think it's going to reward you, but there's definitely a benefit that you can't even ever predict when you stop ignoring that voice and actually just start listening to your creative urges. I feel like in some ways that's what we're here on this planet to do, is to listen to those inner voices and honor them by following the path, even though we don't really know where it's going to lead.
Yes. You're such a nerd, Michael. I love the fact that you're always just reading these. You're always reading something that is going to improve your life and then improve my life because you gave me the high level summary.
That's right. Yeah, I'll give you the cliff notes.
Yeah, that is a book that we've spoken about a lot. And I feel like I'd love to get you back after I finish reading it to talk about it, because I think that it has so many interesting aspects to it. And a lot of people have actually recommended it to me. A lot of guests have recommended it to me. But you said something a little bit before about, we're talking about that permission to go and follow your creativity. I think another thing I was just thinking about is that creativity is fun in my mind. Creativity is really fun. And, we're supposed to be serious about our careers and be on this path and make money and progress up the ladder, as you said before. And so I feel like that's why we don't allow ourselves to be creative sometimes in our careers, that like having fun is kind of the antithesis of being productive and being commercially viable.
Yeah. It's like we've built this world where we feel like we got to measure the benefit of everything we do. But there's Gary Vaynerchuk, who's like a marketing guru, once he always gets asked like, what's the ROI of social media? And he did a presentation called What's the ROI of Your Mom? And basically saying that some things are so valuable and so important that you can't measure the ROI of them, because it's about, in the social media context, it's about connecting with another human. You can't always measure the impact of that. You just need to believe that it's important enough that I want to connect, that I don't need to be able to measure it. It transcends measurement. And I think that with a lot of creativity is like, there's probably episodes you've done or articles we've written or conversations we've had that we will never, ever know the impact that they've had. But I think the call to creativity relies on us to just trust that if we do enough of those things, it's going to create some betterness in the world. We don't always know what that is. So I suppose there's an element of faith involved in that for sure. And
who can measure the ROI of your happiness?
That's right. Or your dog. What's the ROI of Monty? That's the real question.
He is very, very valuable.
Invaluable.
Hey, thanks, Michael Bagg, for joining me today. That was a super cool conversation, and I definitely would like to get you on again, because I think I just love picking your beautiful brain. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I could do this for another hour, and I look forward to doing it in a different hour at a different time.
I'll see you at home. We'll continue the conversation. But I also want to thank everyone who's tuned in to this episode of Creativity Uncovered. If you did enjoy this episode, I do would like to make a small plea for you to jump onto Apple or to Spotify or even onto Facebook and give us a rating or review, because this helps other people find our podcast and share our message, and hopefully start to make the world a bit more of a creative space, because we're all about, unlocking and unleashing creativity here, and uncovering creativity. You see what I did there? And as always, please do get in touch with me if this episode has inspired you and it's helped you summon your creativity. I'd love to know how it has. And if you want to share your story, I'm always interested to talk to new creative souls. So until next time, take care. Thanks for tuning in. If you've made it this far, a huge thank you for your support and tuning into today's episode. Creativity Uncovered has been lovingly recorded on the land of the Cubby Cubby people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast has been produced by my amazing team here at Crisp Communications, and the music you just heard was composed by James Gatling. If you liked this episode, please do share it around and help us on our mission to unlock more creativity in this world. You can also hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episode releases.